Yes. Welcome from the Noahide community, Rabbi. This is Annemarie Lasseur, and it's great to listen together to a lecture of you. And now let us open our hearts and listen to Rabbi Breitowitz. Wonderful and good work in sharing his insights and knowledge to us, Rabbi. You have enriched and guided many of us with your wisdom and insights on our path of understanding what the Torah is for non-Jews that longs for a connection with the God of Israel. Your dedication to sharing Torah and the wisdom has much value to our study group and beyond. May you be blessed with prosperity, health, and continued inspiration in your outstanding work. So the floor is for you, Rabbi Breitowitz.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you for inviting me. It is certainly a great honor to be able to address your group. And I hope you realize how important the Noahide community is to the Jewish people and to God's ultimate plan for humanity. You know, in a sense, instead of looking at Judaism as a religion, one might say there's only one religion, and that is Noahidism. And within Noahidism, the Jews are the Kohanim, the Jews are the priests of the Noahide religion. So just as within the Jewish people, we have a priestly group that has a greater number of commandments than the lay people, so too the Jewish people as a whole are referred to in the book of Exodus as Mamlechet Kohanim, a kingdom of Kohanim. So in a sense, we are all of the same religion. We are all of the same faith. As a Jew, I am a Kohen, so I have certain responsibilities, but we are all walking the same path. And as I know you know, Judaism is unique among religions in preaching that salvation does not depend on becoming Jewish. In fact, if any of you would want to become Jewish, which of course you have the right to do, we would initially at least try to discourage you and say it's not necessary because you are fulfilling God's will by being the righteous Gentile, which is called the Ben Noach. And as the Rambam writes, Maimonides writes, Chasidei umot ha'olam, the pious, God-fearing of the nations of the world, have a share in Olam Haba. They have a share in the eternal paradise of communion with God, which is our ultimate reward, is not limited to Jews. It applies to anyone who embraces the basic fundamental tenets of morality and belief in God, which is enshrined in the 7 commandments of Noah. Now, in reality, the notion of the 7 commandments of Noah is a little bit of a misnomer, because according to the Talmud, these commandments, with one change, were actually given all the way back to Adam Harishon. Adam and Eve were given these commandments. The only exception is that I'll list them just for your, just go over it. The prohibition against eating the limb that was severed from a live animal had a different form in Adam's time because Adam and Eve were not allowed to have meat. They were vegetarians. So as a result, there was no specific directive to a live animal limb. It simply said, don't eat meat at all. Later in Noah's time, after the flood, humanity was given permission to eat meat. So that particular command was reformulated, but the other commandments were indeed given all the way back to Adam. So I know that you obviously are conversant with these commandments, but just to be sure that we're all starting on the same page, let me list them quickly, and I want to give a few comments on the commandments as we go along. First, there is a prohibition against idolatry, against paganism, and this in turn requires a belief in a God, belief in God as a supreme being. Now, this raises a number of interesting questions, and that is the following. Obviously, if one believes in many gods, if one believes in idols, if one believes in the paganism of ancient Greece or Rome, they are in violation of the Noahide code. But what about religions such as Christianity and Islam? Can one be a righteous Noahide and at the same time be a Christian? Now, that's a very, very important question. And as you might expect, among the great Jewish religious scholars who have debated this, there is a matter of dissension. Maimonides differentiated between Christianity and Islam. Now, Maimonides was pre-Reformation, so the only version of Christianity he could have been familiar with was either Roman Catholicism or the Coptic Church, or maybe some Eastern rites. It is Maimonides' position that Christianity, because of the Trinity, at least Trinitarian Christianity, is a form of idolatry because, number one, it posits a duplicity or multiplicity in the Godhead, and that is inconsistent with the unity of God. And number two, it posits some type of divinity within a human material form, corporality, and that too is a form of idolatry because it violates the tenets of incorporeal monotheism. So according to Maimonides, at least a Trinitarian Christian, maybe not a Unitarian, but a Trinitarian Christian would halachically be classified as an idol worshiper, and as a result, by definition, could not be a righteous Noahide. As opposed to Islam, Maimonides states, although Islam is certainly a mistaken faith, we don't believe in Muhammad, obviously, but it is not an idolatrous faith because in its essence, it is a monotheistic religion. And therefore, Maimonides adopted a very interesting view that a Christian, a Trinitarian Christian, could not be a righteous Gentile under the Noahide law. He could be a moral person, and I'll talk about the consequences there. But a Muslim could theoretically be a righteous Gentile in terms of this first law of B'nai Noach. Now, this is the opinion of Maimonides. There is an alternative view of the great scholar, Rabbi Yaakov ben Meir, who was Rashi's grandson, and he is often referred to as Rabbeinu Tam, our teacher, the perfect one. This is a bit of a pun because Jacob in the Bible is referred to as the simple, perfect son. And since Rabbeinu Tam's name was Yaakov, Jacob, so he was called, as a matter of reverence, Rabbeinu Tam. Now, it's interesting. Maimonides lived in Islamic Egypt. Rabbeinu Tam lived in Catholic France. And Rabbeinu Tam took the position that even Christianity is not an idolatrous faith. Once again, it's an erroneous faith from our perspective, but it's not idolatrous because they do believe in an ultimate God within the Trinity. There is the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost, whatever it is. They do believe in an ultimate enshrinement. And Rabbeinu Tam says the definition of idolatry, the prohibited idolatry for Noahides, does not embrace the type of multiplicity that is implicit in the Trinity. And therefore, Rabbeinu Tam does take the somewhat surprising view that even a Christian could still be a righteous Gentile. Now, let me make it very, very clear that from the perspective of truth, Judaism teaches that both Christianity and Islam are mistaken beliefs. So if one is asking, ideally, should a Noahide be a Christian or a Muslim? The answer is no, 100%. But I'm really raising this as an ex post facto type of situation. After the fact, if one had those beliefs, they might be laboring under a theological error, but they would not be excluding themselves from the category of the righteous Noahides. I also want to make a point that Maimonides himself, who considers Christianity idolatry, still says Christianity served a valuable historical function in weaning ancient society away from the immoral paganism towards an ideal of ethical monotheism. So that's a fascinating point, that even Maimonides, who considers it to be idolatry, considers it to be a vast improvement over the immorality and lack of ethical consciousness that was characteristic of paganism and the like. Now, let me point out that this has a number of repercussions. If someone is a righteous Noahide, they have a share in the world to come. Implication, well, maybe we need to think about this. If one does not qualify as a righteous Gentile, they do not have a place in the world to come. Now, that does not mean, please understand, that does not mean eternal damnation. That does not mean burning in hell. It just means you don't have a share in the world to come, which would mean when you're dead, but we're not talking about any eternal damnation. So what Jews say about Christians is not the same as what Christians say about Jews. A Christian might say about a Jew, maybe yes, maybe not, that a Jew is going to burn in hell because they don't accept Jesus. We do not take that position about a Christian. The most we would say is, according to Maimonides, perhaps there is no share in the world to come, but that does not connote any type of eternal damnation or any type of eternal punishment. So that's the comment I wanted to make about idolatry. Now, let's go a little further. Let's go beyond what is called the Abrahamic faiths and look at things like Buddhism, Hinduism, and the like. There, it gets a lot more tricky because, unfortunately, these religions, to some degree, seem to literally be paganistic. Yes, they, Baruch Hashem, thank God, they do have a developed moral code, an ethical code. And in fact, unfortunately, from our perspective, many Jews are attracted to Eastern religions. And that's unfortunate. I believe that 90% of English-speaking converts to Buddhism are Jewish, which is staggering. But nevertheless, much of their ritual appears to be idolatry. It appears to be inconsistent with monotheism. And therefore, unfortunately, for a Jew, it would be idolatry. And even for a Noahide, for a Gentile, it would be idolatry. So Olam Haba is one practical consequence, world to come. There actually is another consequence, which is halachically valid, but not practically. And that is, maybe I shouldn't say this, I don't want to offend anybody. According to the strict halacha is Jewish law, a non-Jew is not allowed to live in the land of Israel unless they qualify as a righteous Gentile. You don't have to be Jewish, but you do have to qualify as a righteous Noahide who is in full compliance, or at least commitment to compliance, everybody sins, with the 7 commandments of Noah. That would mean, strikingly enough, and of course we can't do this, it's not politically correct, that according to Maimonides, a Christian would not be permitted. They could tour, they wouldn't be excluded from visiting, but they would not be permitted to permanently live in the land of Israel. A Muslim could, assuming he's not a terrorist, and a Hindu or a Buddhist might have those problems. As opposed to Rabbeinu Tam's position that Christianity is not idolatrous and therefore one could still be a righteous Gentile, residence in the land of Israel would be permitted. Now, I do want to emphasize that the state of Israel is not a theocracy. It is not governed by religious law presently. And as a religious person, I would not even urge that it be governed by religious law, because until we have the Messiah, till we have Mashiach, we're not in a position to impose religion on anybody. So please do not misunderstand me. I am not advocating for the expulsion of Christians from the Holy Lands, not at all, but just from a pure halachic lens, according to Maimonides, that would be the result, even though that would not be the case according to Rabbeinu Tam. Now, let me backtrack a little bit, though. I made a statement, and I want to test if it's totally true, that unless one is a righteous Gentile, meaning compliance with the Noahide law, they do not have a share in the world to come. The rule that the righteous Gentile has a share in the world to come is only compliance with Noahide laws, including the prohibition against idolatry. Well, let's take a hard case. Let's imagine you have a Hindu, an idolater, right? And the Hindu is a virtuous person, a righteous person, a person who gives charity, a person who discovered the cure for cancer. Is it fair? Is it just that God is not going to give that person an eternal reward for all the good they did because they were laboring under theological error, which they really had no particular reason to know was wrong? So I agonize. I'll be very honest with you. I do agonize over this question. Yes, at least I can tell you there's no eternal damnation. So at least we're okay in that part. But still, that means obliteration, meaning there's nothing left. So once again, I'm here more to be a reporter than a defender. My report is that according to Maimonides, I believe that is the case. Maimonides considers theological correctness to be the sine qua non for admission to the world to come. So no matter how well-intentioned you are, if you don't have the right belief system, you're kind of not admitted, although again, not that there's eternal damnation, but you're just not admitted to the paradise. But I do want to say that there is an alternative view. The alternative view is a view of a number of commentaries who say that all goodness is rewarded in one way or the other. So even if there are theological defects in a belief system, and by the way, this is not only a Noahide problem, this is a problem for a Jew as well, who doesn't believe the right things, that there will be some level of olam haba, or some level of eternal reward, or some level of connection to God for the good that a person did, even if it was not in a context of theological correctness. So once again, Maimonides is not going to buy that. So I have to be honest with you. Maimonides says you either have the right beliefs and you're in, or if you don't have the right beliefs, you're out. But other commentaries focus much more on virtuous conduct, irrespective. In fact, Maimonides says, even if you keep all the Noahide laws, but you do it out of morality rather than a sense of God's commands, you don't go to Olam Haba. Again, Maimonides is very into the belief system. Others focus more on deed rather than creed. I can't tell you I know the answer to this. I guess when we all die, we'll find out. But again, the medieval scholars discuss this matter in great depth. Now, the second, again, I'm just going through the Noahide laws and having comments on each. That's kind of the format of my talk. So I covered, at least briefly, idolatry, belief in God. The second, this is in no particular order, excuse me, are the sexual offenses such as thou shalt not commit adultery and incest. This is part of the basic Noahide code. And here I do have to make a comment. And again, I apologize if I'm not politically correct, but I have to tell you the halachic truth to understand the Noahide code. And that is, it is very clear from the Talmud that homosexual sexual expression is included in the prohibitions against sexual offenses, meaning it covers adultery, it covers incest, and it covers at least male sexual genital sex. Again, we're not penalizing the state of being a homosexual. A person can have many, many attractions, and that's not what is being condemned, but what is being condemned is action. And obviously, this is a very, very sensitive topic, but one needs to know that the Jewish understanding of the law against homosexuality is not only for Jews, it encompasses Gentiles as well via the Noahide code of Giloy Arayot, which is the Hebrew for forbidden sexual expression. Now, be sure you understand me. This is not a call for discrimination in employment. This is not a call for persecution. This is not a call for shaming. Nobody is talking about knocking down bedroom doors and investigating what people are doing. Nobody is supporting criminalization of homosexual activity. As far as I'm concerned, I believe in a political world, at least, of freedom, and it is not my job until the Mashiach comes to impose things on people. But if you're asking me a question, is this a violation of the Noahide code? The answer is it is a violation of the Noahide code, and as a result, it may affect access to Olam Haba, to the world to come, and everything else. Now, again, this is hardly a Noahide problem. We obviously face the same issue within the Jewish community itself, how to deal with gay people. And the challenge is to have compassion and support for people as individuals and to recognize the struggle that people are going through, but not necessarily to legitimate or validate behavior. So the notion of a gay pride march in Jerusalem is something that's very, very deeply hurtful to me, but I'm not going to go out and have a counter protest against it because that's very likely to backfire. There is a very interesting comment in the Talmud that says that, homosexual relations are improper, but it's even worse to make a marriage ceremony out of it. In other words, these words are almost prophetic, meaning there's a distinction between what you might call casual homosexual relations and trying to sanctify it within a framework of marriage. The rabbis of the Talmud saw the latter as much more offensive to God than the former. Because when you do something wrong and you acknowledge that it's wrong, that's one level of misbehavior. But when you do something wrong and you want to elevate it as if it's holy, as if it's sanctified, and you take the holiness of marriage and you want to import it into a relationship that contravenes God's law, that is even more offensive. So it's so fascinating that the rise of the legalization of gay marriage is precisely a descent into what the Talmud considered to be much worse than the simple practice of homosexuality. So that's kind of my comment on number 2. Now, let me mention a very, very fascinating halachic complication. It's not so relevant to you, but I'll mention it because it's intellectually very fascinating. Of course, obviously, any Noahide at any moment is perfectly allowed to undergo a full conversion and enter the Jewish people if they want. There is no obligation to do so. And in fact, one would even be discouraged, but this possibility always exists. Do you know that there's a principle in Jewish conversion that when someone converts, it's as if they are a newly born entity? And that actually erases past familial relationships, not emotionally, but legally. So this is going to blow your mind a little bit. If a mother and a son convert, if a brother and a sister convert, if a mother and a daughter convert, halachically, they would actually be allowed to marry each other because they are no longer considered to be blood relatives for purpose of the incest prohibition. But rabbinically, it is forbidden because it has the appearance of incest and the like. So if a brother and sister were to marry, God forbid, as Noahides, they would be violating the Noahide code. But once they convert and they're Jews, they would be permitted to marry, except for rabbinic enactments because of appearances. So that's a fascinating issue where acquiring the status of a Jew might actually create a leniency over what their status was when they were righteous Noahides prior to conversion. So that's my comment on Gilui Arayot, the second of the Noahide law, which is sexual offense. We then come to the third one, which is murder. And again, most people would think murder is a fairly self-evident proposition, but even things like murder have complexity. And here too, I have to mention a controversial topic, a bit of a painful topic. Under the Noahide law, it is absolutely the case that abortion of an unborn fetus is halachically treated as murder, not only from the perspective of Jewish law, but from the perspective of Noahide law, which means to say that abortion, procuring an abortion, performing an abortion, is considered to be murder under the 7 commandments of Noah. And this is derived from a very interesting biblical exegesis of Genesis, where it says, he who spills the blood of a person within a person, his blood shall be shed. So the Talmud says, what is the meaning of the expression, a person within a person. That describes a fetus, a person within a person that is treated as murder. Now, this gets complicated because abortion is permitted if the mother's life is in danger. And we do treat that not only in terms of physical danger, but psychological breakdowns, psychological danger. So the prohibition against abortion is not an absolute prohibition. We do recognize that there may be exceptions due to extreme physical dangers to the mother or extreme psychological dangers, which can be life-threatening. But abortion on demand certainly would not be permitted, both under Jewish law for Jews and for non-Jewish law under the 7 commandments of Noah. Now, this raises an interesting political question that I have to face as a rabbi. Again, I live in Israel. I'm an American citizen as well. So I'm going to speak from the perspective of the United States, and I don't know the situation in the Netherlands, but you can apply it to your situation. As you know, for many, many years, the United States Supreme Court upheld a constitutional right for a woman to terminate a pregnancy, at least until the last trimester. And this was the famous or infamous case of Roe versus Wade. Just last year, the more conservative Supreme Court, which had 3 judges appointed by Donald Trump, overruled the pivotal case of Roe versus Wade, taking away the constitutional right of abortion, which now means it goes back to the 50 states. Every state can now decide, does a woman have a right to an abortion? Meaning every different state. Now, the liberal states are still going to allow this: California, New York, Massachusetts. But a lot of the more conservative right-wing, let's say Christian states, are passing very severe restrictions on abortion because they're now given the green light. So here's my question, the question I grapple with. I am against abortion on demand. I believe it's a violation. I believe it's murder. So that is my religious stance. What is my political stance? Should I push for restrictive abortion laws because that is in compliance with my belief? Or would I basically say that even though I believe abortion is a sin, I don't want the government, a secular government, to get involved in imposing its morality or even my morality on others? Meaning, is it possible to be religiously pro-life and politically pro-choice? Now that seems maybe inconsistent, and many would say it is inconsistent. Again, I'm throwing things out just to think about, but the counter argument is that I don't want the state to necessarily get involved in enforcing religious beliefs because that can be used against me. Let me give you an example. I told you that both under Jewish law and under Noahide law, abortions are permitted if the mother's life is in danger. But who decides if the mother's life is in danger? Who decides what the circumstances are? When you live in a pro-choice world where abortion is not affected by the state, then it becomes an internal religious matter to be discussed with the woman, her doctor, her rabbi, her clergyman, whatever it is. Once you turn it over to the state, the decision is going to be made by a secular authority who may disagree with the rabbi. So if I want to maximize my religious freedom and the woman's religious freedom, we might fare better under a pro-choice legislative setting in which the state does not get involved and the decisions are made religiously. So the question is, should my primary concern be what's best for religious people, or should my primary concern be what's best for society as a whole? For society as a whole, I would rather have abortions banned. But for the narrow parochial interest of my religious community, I would rather have the state not involved in the process at all. And then we decide things based on Halacha or Noahide law, depending on whether you're a Jew or a Gentile. So this is an interesting thought experiment that's become much more relevant now that Roe versus Wade has been repealed. The role of utilizing secular law to advance religious objectives. That's a double-edged sword. In the short run, it may work to benefit your foundational beliefs. In the long run, it can be used against you. For example, it can be used in the Jewish community. It can be used to ban shechita, ban ritual slaughter of animals. Once you're getting the state involved in religion, there are European countries that have said that Jewish ritual slaughter is cruelty to animals. That's a total canard, that's a total libel, but they have made that case. I believe Switzerland, for example, I'm sure there are other countries as well, does not allow Jewish ritual slaughter of meat. All meat in Switzerland has to be imported from other countries and the like. Okay, so that again, my format is I'm going through the laundry list of commandments and appending some comments to each of them. Let me raise another issue. And again, I'm saying things that I could get in trouble for, so don't quote me on all of these. There are cases where it's proper to murder somebody, and actually it wouldn't be called murder, it would be called justifiable homicide. And this would be in self-defense of your own life, or even to defend others. Let's imagine a terrorist, right? A terrorist comes into a building with a machine gun. And if you don't do anything, the terrorist is going to kill a lot of people. According to both Jewish law and Noahide law, whether you're a Jew or a Gentile, there is a mitzvah, there is a good deed, there is a commandment to kill, if you can't disable otherwise, to kill that person in order to prevent the loss of innocent life. Now, please understand, this is killing him before the fact. Once he committed his crime, you cannot be a vigilante. You have to turn him over to justice system. Okay, the concept, I can kill him, is not a punishment for the murder he committed. That cannot be done by individuals. But I can kill him to prevent him from killing others. In fact, this even applies to a non-culpable victim. If a 5-year-old child, God forbid, is brandishing a gun, there's no other way of stopping him. You could kill the child. Now, again, hopefully there are other ways of disabling him. Now, that's very clear. What I said now is very, very clear. And the Hebrew term for this is rodef. Rodef is a pursuer, and you have the right to kill the pursuer who's trying to kill you or kill others. Now, how does this play with abortion? Let's imagine you have a doctor who shows up. In fact, these are cases that happen every year. He shows up at the hospital, at the abortion clinic, to perform abortions. Now, I had just said that both under Jewish law and under Noahide law, we treat abortion as murder unless the mother's life or health is severely jeopardized. How far are you going to take that? Would I be allowed to kill the abortion doctor to prevent him from performing the abortion? After all, if he was going to kill a born human being, I could shoot him. Right? That's the law of rodef. Would you apply rodef to killing the abortion doctor? Interesting question. Some say that even though abortion is an offense, it is not exactly the same as homicide. It's a little different. It's potential life, not actual life. And therefore, the law of rodef, of killing the pursuer, wouldn't necessarily apply. Moreover, by killing the doctor, you're not really saving anybody because they'll just have another doctor do it. Meaning, there too, you have to ask yourself, am I saving the fetus by killing the doctor? Probably not. And therefore, you wouldn't be allowed, right? So these are things to think about. Life is complicated, and there are going to be a lot of variations in this. Okay, so far I've covered 3 out of 7. I've covered idolatry. I've covered improper sexual relations, incest, adultery, homosexuality. I covered murder, including abortion. We now come to the 4th one. Again, no particular order, which is gezel. Gezel means theft, and that essentially means respect for property. Thou shalt not steal. And this raises also complications. There is different types of theft. There is theft of tangible property. I could steal your car. I could steal your computer. What about intellectual property? Meaning, how far does the concept of theft go? What about downloading programs or downloading material from the internet that is under copyright or the like? Does the concept of theft limited to tangible things, or do we talk about intangible property? Much of the property in modern society is not embodied in physical entities. It is ideas, it is inventions, patents, copyrights, trademarks, counterfeiting goods. You're not stealing anything physical, but you're taking an idea, you're taking a technology, and you're incorporating it. Theft can be a much broader concept than simply robbing and stealing somebody's car and the like. And one has to be sensitive to this. Now, the counter argument is, especially when you're talking about downloading from the internet, is that if the companies know they have no way of stopping it, they essentially have given up hope of pursuing the consumer. They will go after the middleman, they'll go after the content, the providers. And as a result, there may be a relinquishing of ownership via giving up hope of any meaningful recovery. And that's a very interesting idea that applies in many, many areas, that when an owner is faced with an inability to enforce his rights, paradoxically, that becomes the reality that the right is given up and the owner will essentially go after the middle guy rather than the individual end users. Again, I'm not here to give you any decisions. I just want you to be aware of the complexities that both a Jew and a Gentile need to be aware of if you want to live in compliance with God's law. Theft is a very, very serious offense. According to rabbinic tradition, the primary sin of Noah's generation, the generation of the flood, was theft, not respecting the property of each other. Okay. The fifth prohibition is you could generalize it and call it an anti-cruelty to animals. And again, most of you will never have occasion to violate this, but just be aware, this is called Aver min achai. This means a limb that is severed from an animal when it is still alive. You take a cow, you take a knife, you cut off the leg, you eat it. It sounds very, very barbaric, as indeed it is, but apparently it was widely practiced in ancient cultures. And this is considered to be cruelty to animals. And I think we can generalize that this mitzvah or this commandment represents a sense of compassion, not just for other human beings, but a compassion for animals as well. So it's always true in any list of mitzvot, whether it's a Jewish mitzvah or a Noahide mitzvah, you got to look at two things. You got to look at the letter of the law, but you also have to look at the spirit and the value that is enshrined in that letter of the law. So the letter of the law here is very, very narrow. I simply shouldn't cut off a leg of an animal while it's alive and eat it. The spirit of the law is compassion for animals, and that raises a whole bunch of issues regarding animal experimentation and the like, where even though you're not eating anything, but you are violating the spirit of compassion. Now, I think there's a very big difference between using animals to test drugs that could save human lives, like cancer drugs, and using animals in ways that torture them to find a deodorant or a perfume. Meaning, if the use is relatively trivial, that would not justify. In other words, the suffering, if any, must be justified by compelling human needs that are more important. Unless it's a compelling need, suffering is not going to be justified. Now, some people argue, well, does that mean we should be vegetarians? So, as I said before, non-Jews are not bound by the kosher laws. You don't have to eat kosher meat. Kosher meat is slaughtered in a certain way, and you don't have to have meat that's slaughtered in that way. Jews cannot eat pork or shellfish. You are allowed to eat pork or shellfish. There's nothing wrong with your eating pork or shellfish. So I am not going to make the claim, which would simply not be true, that the Noahide law compels compliance with kosher laws. Absolutely not. However, I will bring up the following. If indeed there is compelling evidence that animals are kept under conditions where they are really under great distress, great pain, they are mistreated, they are suffering, it may be morally appropriate to either boycott those particular companies or even switch to kosher slaughter, although we've had our problems too, but kosher slaughter is a much more humane. So there actually may be an argument for you to go kosher, not because you have to keep kosher, but simply because the animals are kept in a more humane environment than would be the case in the non-kosher commercial slaughter world. But again, it doesn't have to be a kosher model. I understand there are, at least in the States, there are organic producers that kind of raise the animals under nice conditions and comfortable conditions, and they're not crowded and the like. And as far as a Noahide would be concerned, even if they're not kosher because they're not slaughtered in the right way, that would be perfectly okay. All I'm saying is that the moral resonance of Avram and Achai requires that you look at the food that you eat and the conditions under which the animals are treated, because that is a moral concern both for Jews and for non-Jews under the Noahide law. Now, I'm sorry, I think that's number 5. So number 6 is also going to be a rarity, and that is blasphemy. There is a prohibition to curse God. And once again, that's kind of self-evident. You're not going to come across it a lot. Now, let me just make an interesting point. This is a prohibition to curse God, not to curse somebody in the name of God. So when you say, blank, damn you, you're not cursing God, you're cursing a person. Now, that's a very bad thing. That's a very not nice thing to do, but that is not blasphemy. Blasphemy is when a person actually directs their cursing to God. And again, once and again, that would be a relatively rare thing. So that is 6 of the Noahide laws. We come to number 7, and number 7 is actually the most interesting. And I would really like to give a whole lecture, maybe some other time, on this 7th law, because the 7th law is so generic that its exact content is hard to pin down. The 7th law is called laws. The 7th law of Noah is laws. Well, what type of law is laws? Dinim is the Hebrew word for it. So there's a basic argument between Maimonides and Nachmanides, what the content of the 7th commandment is. According to Maimonides, it is an obligation on non-Jewish societies to establish a court system to enforce the other 6 Noahide laws. Meaning, we have 6 Noahide laws, and the 7th one is the ideal of enforcing those Noahide laws. And that is what number 7 is, the mitzvah, the Noahide obligation to create a court system of enforcement. Now, if we ask ourselves, do our societies have a court system that enforces the Noahide laws? The short answer is no. We do have a court system that enforces some of the Noahide laws. We do have a court system that enforces laws against theft and maybe laws against incest and laws against murder, although not completely in terms of abortion. So there is no question that we do have partial enforceability of Noahide laws, but we certainly don't enforce, and I argued before that we're really not even able to do that. We don't have laws that enforce the prohibition against idolatry or against blasphemy or against cutting a limb off an animal, although that might be cruelty to animals and the like. So it does appear at this particular point that even righteous Gentiles are not in full compliance with the seventh Noahide law. But in reality, if you think about it, the seventh law is very different than the other six. The other six are laws that you have as an individual. You as an individual must obey these six laws. The seventh law is not directed to an individual. I mean, you cannot create a court system. The seventh law is a societal obligation rather than something that devolves on individuals. So as a result, you as an individual will not be denied olam haba because you didn't make a court system, because you're not in a position to create those court systems. Now, this is Maimonides' view of the seventh Noahide law. There is an alternative view of Nachmanides, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman. In Hebrew, he's called Ramban, so it's always hard to differentiate. Rambam is Maimonides. Ramban, with an N at the end, is Nachmanides. And he says that this is not just a judicial obligation to have a court system, it's a legislative obligation. This is fascinating. Noahide societies are commanded by God to promulgate additional laws that create a more fair and equitable society. This can include taxation, environmental regulation, health and safety, welfare laws, education systems, and the like, which means essentially the Noahide structure, according to the Ramban, is twofold. There are six objective prohibitions that God gives you. And then the seventh is the ethical imperative of trying to create a more just society through a political process. And when those laws are made, you are religiously obligated to keep them. So if there's a health regulation, you are obligated under the seventh Noahide law to comply with that regulation. So you see, it's a very different picture. According to Maimonides, the seventh law is simply a matter of enforcing the other six. According to Nachmanides, it is a mandate to create a more equitable and fair society. Now, what's interesting is that obviously opinions are going to differ what that means. And what that means, therefore, is that Noahides are given the freedom of political debate. It's interesting that unlike maybe the Torah, that is much more specific regarding our obligation, interpersonal obligations, God is giving Noahide societies a great deal more of latitude to fashion societies based on justice, as long as their motive is to create greater equality, greater fairness, compassion, and the like. And then they're given the freedom to formulate society in that way. So it's fascinating that the Noahide Code, according to Ramban, according to Nachmanides, acknowledges that there may be different ways of doing things, that the way you do things in the Netherlands don't have to be the way it's done in Germany or France or England or the US or Israel or whatever it would be. Now, let me just mention that there are some additional Noahide ideas that are not in the seven, meaning the seven does not encompass everything. For example, there is no particular obligation on Noahides to give charity to the poor. It's not listed in this list. And yet the commentaries say that this is something that is so instinctual, so intuitive, that Noahides can be bound by what are called natural morality. That natural morality supplements revealed law. So the Noahide commandments are revealed law, but God also expects you to have well-developed consciences, and God can hold us to account for not utilizing the moral intuition that a sensitive human being is supposed to have. That's a very fascinating idea, because that essentially means that natural law, as philosophers call it, can coexist within the revealed structure of the Noahide law. Now, one of the questions that sometimes Noahides have, and it's a very good question, is, okay, I got 7 things, actually practically only 6 things that I got to do, but that doesn't fill up my day. That doesn't fill up my life. Jews have so many rituals. Jews have the Shabbat, Jews have the Sabbath, Jews have the synagogue services, Jews have the holidays, Passover, Sukkot, right, Shavuot. And that lends a richness, and that lends a ceremonial aspect to religion. Noahides seemingly don't have all of that. And the legitimate question is, how do I emotionally deepen my relationship to God if all I have are this very, very small list, and I don't have the holidays, and I don't have the different rituals? So here, the thing you have to understand is that although you're not given the specific guidance of the Torah, and maybe there's a great deal of improvisation, there's a great deal that you can borrow from Judaism and make your own and adapt it to the Noahide faith. Let's take the Shabbat as an example. It is very true that not only does a Noahide not have to keep the Shabbat, they're not even supposed to keep all of Shabbat. They are not supposed to keep Shabbat like a Jew keeps Shabbat. But that does not mean that Shabbat should be like any other day of the week. Shabbat, after all, commemorates an idea that you share with me, that God made the world in 6 days and he rested on Shabbat. And Shabbat is celebrating God as the creator of heaven and earth. So yes, the technical Shabbat laws are not for Noahides, but you can have a festive family meal. You can light the candles. In fact, you can even light them on Saturday. I can't light them on Saturday. I have to light them beforehand. And I think it's totally appropriate for you to celebrate God's creating the world, creating the universe on Shabbos. When it comes to the other holidays as well. In fact, there are websites, maybe I'll send you links if you don't have them. You may very well have them already, which actually talk about how to incorporate the Jewish religious rituals into a Noahide framework in which you too participate in the sacred history of God's revelation in the earth. So that's one thing. Another thing is that obviously study, you read the Bible, you read the prophets, the Old Testament, of course, you read prophets, you read the ideas of faith in God, resilience, trust, both from the Bible and from later books that were written about them. And you develop your relationship to God by study, by contemplation, by prayer. It's not so developed yet, but there's no reason why there shouldn't be Noahide congregations. The same way there are synagogues, and there are churches, and there are mosques. You people should have your temples, your synagogues. Now, it doesn't have to be a fancy building, that's not important. But even if it's just in your home, you meet together to pray. And because there are more and more Noahides in the world, it is, Baruch Hashem, thank God, it is a growing movement, which is very, very beautiful. I think there's a lot of good resources out there in which you can deepen and expand your spirituality beyond the naked list of the 7. Now, I hope what I've shown you is that even the 7 is much more than 7. There's a lot of complicated issues in all of these. But even so, if you feel you need richer food in your diet, please be aware that this food is available, and there are resources that can give you a very deeply meaningful spiritual life in your journey towards God and towards ultimate salvation. So again, I'm very happy to take any questions or comments that you have. May God bless you. May you feel his light and feel his love. May you continue to bring light to the world by your following in the pathway that he has given to you. So thank you so much.
Amen. Thank you, Rabbi. With all my heart, you have broadened our minds with mind-blowing questions you raised. So it will certainly will be a topic we will discuss furthermore. So thank you very much.
So I wish you a lot of luck and hatzlacha, we say in Hebrew. If I could ever be of assistance to any of you, please feel free to contact me by email. I think the organizer has my email and the like. And much blessing. And thank you. Be well.